from 7 to 7. We got Wednesday afternoon off and Saturday afternoon off for $5 a week. And that's how I'd saved up $60. But a book salesman came around and he had some pretty red books. He said, now these books are the equivalent, I think that's a big word he used, of a junior college education. He said, now if you buy these books and study them, it'll be the same as a junior college education. Well, I had to pay him $5 down. And when you work from about sunrise till sundown and then come in and feed up in the dark and then eat a big supper and go upstairs and try to read those books by lamplight, guess what happened? I got sleepy right quick. So I wasn't making any progress. But this man told me, he said, now a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. But I took those books to Professor Eliezer, we called him, and said, what do you think? And he looked at the books. He said, now Ernest, if you were going to be a CPA or an accountant, those books would help you. He said, you're going to be a pastor and you need a general liberal education. And those books won't help you. He said, what you do, said you put them back in the box. He's got his $5 and you're not going to get that back. And so I shipped them back. And that's why I had $55 rather, but Bernard said, that won't take you very far. He said, he said, I don't need any money. And said, I'm going to make expert rifleman in a couple of weeks here, looks like, and I'll make $31 a month. And he said, you just let me know what you need, but keep account of it. We didn't know the word interest. We didn't even know that was, we just, and I did. And he helped me through 2 years of Young Harris College, and I owed him $500. Well, when I finished Emory, had to work my way through Emory, I got a job as principal of the Lincoln High School. Miller Exley was the superintendent. I taught 5 subjects, coached baseball, basketball, and track, and churned ice cream for the PTA. The first year I got $75 a month. Of course, it wasn't paid in the summertime, but I went back to seminary in the summer of 1940. And then when I finished, I went back to school in 1941, but I taught 2 years. They liked me. A fellow Zipper was one of the trustees, and we were sort of kin to each other. So they raised my salary to $100 a month the next year. When they wanted me to stay on, they were going to give me big money, but I said, the Lord's called me to preach, and I've got to go prepared. So I did. But that was an interesting experience, teaching. And as I think about those, my home room was the 10th grade, and I had Sid Walthour, Herman Zipra, Ernest Rowan, Frank Pittman, all those young people who turned out so good. And I had a young girl in there, what was her name? She was a pretty little thing, and frankly, I looked at her pretty hard. But you couldn't date the students. That was a no-no. What was her name? But anyway, Callie Kessler and I played basketball together. We were on the Springfield Athletic Club. And for the first time, I played against Jimmy Varnell. And he said, Easter, I didn't know one man could have so many elbows, because I'd go up for that goal and anything under me would just get it in the head. But anyway, Callie Kessler was a fine boy, but I didn't like it too much when he was courting that pretty little girl. But he married that pretty little girl. What was the name? You'll remember? And she had a boy, and he was Kessler. And he's the fellow that's made all this money. He was a part of, you'll tell me who it is, man.
Yeah, I'll tell you the name. Go ahead.
had a Baptist preacher in Springfield named Lon Day, and one of his boys was pretty smart. And this Kessler boy was a CPA, and they got in partnership with Days Inn. And Callie was a good carpenter, and so he would build and supervise the building of these Days Inn all over the country. And when they sold it, they had a lot of money. And but that's sort of a little bit of the history. I can't think of that girl's name at the moment. But Callie later died. But so much for Rincon. Now you all want to know what it was like back then?
Yeah, tell us some of what you had to eat. What did your mother cook during the week? You already told us a little bit about
Well, I was
turnip
sort
greens.
of puny. We went barefooted a lot, and I got ground itch. And we didn't have any connection between ground itch and hookworms. But those hookworms would eat on me a little bit, and I was a little on the puny side.
Well, what was ground itch now?
That's hookworms. That's what gives you hookworms. And those hookworms were sort of gnawing on me on the inside, and I wasn't too healthy. But we planted some Spanish peanuts. And when I'd get through feeding up at night, I'd go in the loft over the cow pen, and I'd pick me off some of those Spanish peanuts. And I'd eat some raw. And that sort of improved my health. And I'd pick them off, and my mother, you know, we had a wood stove, and you had an oven. And I'd put those peanuts in the oven while she was cooking breakfast. And when I got ready to go to school, I had me 5 or 6 bags of peanuts. And I'd take them, and folks like Coley Ron, Ravenel that had a little money, they'd give me a nickel or a dime a bag for them. The teacher didn't like it much because they'd eat them in school. And she wanted me not to quit selling them, but I don't know. But I remember what fun it was. I earned $1 selling peanuts, and I went to the Springfield Methodist Church, and I put my own tithe in. I remember how good it felt. And I've just been all these years. I was 45 years as a pastor, and I've been retired about 15, and I'm still tithing. I don't mean to be bragging, but it used to hurt me to give. But now we give it, and it's quit hurting. And that's what we're living for, to give. But I got started on those peanuts. Well, that's one of the things that wasn't on the table. But what did we have to eat? We was raised pretty poor. We didn't have anything but country sausage and ham and cow butter and cream and milk. And my mama wasn't a biscuit lady. She made homemade rolls. And you can understand why I don't care much for biscuits. If you get a homemade roll and break it up and put milk and cream on it and syrup, man, who wants a biscuit? But we was raised hard. We didn't have anything like Post toasters, cream of wheat. We was raised hard and poor. Sometimes there was cracks in the floor. And sometimes we couldn't tell where the dog was in the house, but we didn't have no dogs in the house, but it was barking. But now we would let cats in. But when Papa said scat, he meant scat. And so he had a couple of holes under the front door. And he said scat. And those cats would make a dart. And they had to stay out in the barn and catch rats. They weren't house cats. But we didn't go hungry. My mother, she would read up and she knew what was good for us. And she used to say, eat your collards, Ernest. They're good for you. They got iron in them. And I was almost like George Bush, the first president. He said, I can't stand, what's that stuff?
Broccoli.
Because my mama said it's good for you. But guess what? I didn't like collards. But when I was teaching at Rincon, I was teaching a course in general science. And we got into foods and calories and what was good for you. And I figured I wasn't smart enough to be counting calories. So I made up my mind that I was going to learn to like everything that was wholesome and good for you. And Carlisle actually had a little store across the way. His cute little girl she was clerking. And I said, I like everything that's good to eat. I've learned from sort. And I said, if you can show me anything that I don't like, I'll buy it and pay double price for it. And she began, I like it. But then she pulled out a can of dog food. I said, that's below the belt. I said, I'd probably like it, but, and I think that's one reason I'm as healthy as I am at 84. We eat 4 or 5 vegetables a day, and everything that's wholesome is good. And when I get up in the morning, I eat a big breakfast. I eat 2 pieces of toast with a little smear stuff on it. You don't call it butter, but it tastes like butter. It's better than butter. But then I put some homemade grape jam on it and fill it pretty thick. And then I pour some honey. I'm a hobby beekeeper, and I've got that honey, and I pour it on there, and I hold over the plate to keep it from dripping, and I drink a cup of coffee. And it's, what's the kind of coffee that doesn't have much caffeine in it?
Decaf.
Decaf, yeah, that's what I do. And I eat a cup of coffee and I drink a cup, the opposite. And then I get me a big bowl and I put some bran, about 2 tablespoons of bran in that. And then I put about 3 different kinds of cereals on top of that. And I sometimes cut up an apple, and then I pour milk on it, and I eat that. And then I can go to the bathroom and stay regular, and I don't feel weak in the morning until about 11:30. So I reckon you'd say that's sort of how eating right is the secret of staying healthy. And I know it's not permanent, but I sure am enjoying this good health. As long as I live. And I took a Bible study in the church, 34 weeks, reading the Bible all the way through, called the Disciples Bible Study. And on the last 34th, we were supposed to compliment each other, so to say good things about each other. Well, I was saying what I had to be thankful for. First time I've ever had a lady pastor. Her name is Patty Ryle Clay. And I said, Pastor Patty, we sure do have a lot to be thankful for. You can rear back and preach like a man. I thought they were going to cut my eyes, spit my eyes out. But I was kidding when they got to me. They weren't funny, they just said, Brother Ernest, we're so glad, so happy how active you are at your age. I said, I'm thankful too, but I got a problem. And she said, what's that? I said, Pastor Patty, it's not permanent. But that's not a problem, folks. That's an opportunity to do all the good you can, and all the ways you can, and all the people you can, as long as you can. So that's what I'm planning to do. And I hope I won't outlive my usefulness. But if I get in a wheelchair, I can be useful. Because the best contribution you can make is to love people and inspire them, and sort of, make them feel like they're worthwhile. And, God doesn't make any junk. Now, we talk about what we eat. We ate good. Now, the poor people that lived in the city, they had to cut the piece of pork chop in 2 or 3 pieces. But in the country, we ate backbone. You know that part up on the top there that's so good, that's so high and expensive, what do you call that? Anyway. The loin. You go to the store and buy that stuff, but we'd kill hogs, sometimes 400 or 500 pound hogs, and we'd cut that backbone part of the rib. And man, you talk about something good. That was good. we was raised poor, but we didn't go hungry. Most historians talk a lot about events and dates and things, but I'm sort of a hobby historian, but I like people. And I think I know more about my family. My older brother Bernard, we had a lot of fun together, did a lot of things. We made a shortcut to timber landing one time, we're barefooted, and he stepped on a moccasin. And we don't know which was the scariest, him or the moccasin, but they parted company right quick. My papa taught us to swim. There was an old, down on the Runs Creek, below our place, there was an old fish pond. One part of it was narrow, and the other part had a wing like this that would make the fish come through that narrow spot. And then when they got through that narrow spot, there was a trap. They couldn't go any further. And they had fish. You know, it wasn't anything such a law then. But just below that fish trap, and we could see the old timbers there when I was a boy, there was a deep spot, and Papa said, "Boys, let's learn to swim today." He was a great swimmer. And he said, we didn't mind putting our face under the water. He said, "I want you to do your hands like this and just push across." Well, we tried to keep our heads up. He said, "No, put your arms on your ears, keep your head under the water, and just push across." And we could go on, we could just glide all the way across. And directly, one of us said, Papa, we wanted to swim." He said, "What you think you're doing now?" He said, "Kick your feet." And then a little bit later, you know, you could raise up and dog paddle. But we both learned to swim, and I was Associate Conference Director of Youth Work for the South Georgia Conference in the summer of 1941. And I directed a lot of camps and assemblies. And the intermediate group were, if they couldn't swim, I'd have as many as 15 or 20 that couldn't swim. I said, "Those that can't swim, beat me at the pool or the creek, whatever it was, at 2 o'clock. It was in the summertime, and I didn't want anybody else watching. And I have taught many young people to swim in one afternoon. And you know, the next afternoon they get a little better. But that's a secret. A dog can swim because he's not afraid of the water. And people can swim. I think if you throw a baby in there and his mama wasn't around, he'd swim out. But my wife wouldn't let me try. Anyway, we had fun. Now my sister Polly Varnell, she was my sister, and she was born January the 25th, 1919. Well, she thought I was the greatest thing in the world. She'd follow me like a puppy dog, and everything I did, she wanted to do. If I'd climb a tree, she'd climb higher. And we'd have pet chickens. We'd get a little old bitty, and that bitty learned to follow us. And then we'd turn up a board, and there'd be bugs under that he'd eat. And man, we had those pet chickens. One time, an old sow Papa had about 11 pigs, and she didn't have but 10 nipples. And that little pig was fixing to die, and Papa saw it, so he gave us that pig and said, "Now, if you feed him, he's a runt, but he'll grow." And man, you talk about something smart, but a pig is smart. And they'd follow us just like a dog. And but the problem about being on a poor man's farm, when we got that pig going pretty good, he was able to eat enough. He got big enough. When my papa sold the pigs, he sold my pet pig too. He didn't do it while we were home, but I didn't like it much. But that's part of being poor in the country. They'll sell you pet pigs. Well, we had all sorts of things. She would follow me and everything. She wanted to know what. There was a hole up in the rafting, it looked like. And she said, "What made that hole up there?" I said, a carpenter bee, they're mean things. She said, how can we get him out there? I said, well, I'm not sure, but I said, put your finger over the hole. And I hit the thing and the bee came out and stung her. Well, her brother wasn't such a smart feller after that. And another time, we had an old wild stray cat that was catching all the quail. And I didn't even think about hunting quail then, but we didn't like that cat. And Mama said, you ought to get rid of that cat. So I had a dog named Spot, mostly a hound dog. But he had enough something else in him that he would treat pretty good. And I sicked him on that cat and he run him up a big old hickory tree. And the cat was safe, he thought. But I climbed up that tree and I made him jump out. I said, catch him, Spot, catch him. And he almost caught him, but he ran down the middle of the cornfield and he caught him. And I went over and watched it. Now, if you've ever seen something rough, a dog and a cat fight, and he finally killed him. But Polly heard about me killing that cat, and she didn't like it. But Polly and I had a great time, and when we would go to Upper League together, and she had a part on the program, and she had a word, and she was calling it fatigue. I said, Polly, I said, that's not fatigue, that's fatigue. And she pronounced it a couple times, but sure enough, at that night, she called it fatigue. But Jimmy Varnell thought she was about the prettiest girl around, and I don't think anybody prettier than Polly Varnell, Polly Seckinger. But he married her, and he had a new home, a new car, his partnership in the Springfield Motor Company, just a great salesman, just everything looked like he was a counselor for the sub-district, a great layman, but he got under conviction and said the Lord had called him to preach. Well, some people told me, said, you ought to stop Jimmy. He said, he's going to sell his house and go back to car. You ought to stop him. I said, I didn't call him to ministry, and I'm not going to bother him. But he sold his car, he sold his house, and gave up his job. Now, Jimmy Varnell passed the 6th grade by the skin of his teeth, and so did Spurgeon Edwards. But I failed. I made 69 1/3, and they made 69 2/3. They just did pass. And Jimmy was a great basketball player, and he went to Armstrong College, played basketball. He lasted 1 quarter. He flunked out. That same Jimmy Varnell, when he said yes to God and went back to Statesboro to school, made A's and B's. He had a purpose. He had a good mind. He made one of the finest ministers we had, and Polly made absolutely one of the best preachers' wives. She could entertain bishops and with her pleasant way. But I reckon that's enough about Polly. She's not history. She's your neighbor. You all know Polly. But each one of my brothers and sisters, I had a special thing. One time she went fishing with us, and it gets sort of dull. You have to sit there and wait for that call. And she was up there, and she was an old stump up there, and it was rotten, and she was sort of tearing it apart. And guess what? There was a yellow jacket nest in there. And those yellow jackets began to wait on her, and it was all we could do to get them off of her. But we finally got her rescued. She had about 8 or 9 yellow jacket stings, and Papa, he chewed tobacco, and he put some of that tobacco on it. But she was so sick and sort of weak, and he said, Ernest, run to the house and get the little wagon, a little play wagon, but big enough to haul. And we hauled her home in that wagon. But she didn't mess with no rotten stumps anymore. We had all sorts of things, but we survived. I don't remember many things before I went to school, but this must have been before we went to school. Those old houses back there had a kitchen and a dining room on the back section, and then a connecting porch to the main house. Well, that old house had that on there. We never did use that kitchen and dining room. We just stored stuff in there. We always had a path. And out that back door, there was a smokehouse right there, and there was a sort of a dip in the ground there, made by people walking up that steps. And when it would rain, the steps wasn't there anymore, but when it would rain, that would be the first place the water would puddle. And we would always run to see which one could get there first. And I beat her there, but I couldn't stop. And I went right out in that puddle of water. So we had a lot of fun. But I think maybe I ought to tell you about flunking the 6th grade. I was sort of mean. We were going to Berryville School, and I liked it at Berryville. Now, Rudolph Wilson and Danny Exler and some of those fellows would call me Euster because I couldn't pronounce an R for rooster. Well, I didn't like it much, but we played hoop and hide and hound and hare and all kind of things. And Aunt Lolly, my aunt, was teaching the grammar school, and Cap Mingledorf was teaching the people up to the 10th grade. And Lolly would hear the lessons, and I think I learned more listening to those other people. I don't remember learning much, but I liked it. But my father and my mother sort of reluctant. That was her. They lived, Charlie Exler lived within a mile of the Berryville School. And she liked for me to be out there without kidding people. But Papa said, we need to send them to Springfield. It's a better school, better teachers. And so they decided together. But I remember at Berryville, you say, you didn't want to go to old Springfield, or old Guyton, whatever it wasn't you. It was old stuff. And I remember we drove a mule and buggy out there. And I think every time that wheel went over, I dropped a tear. I didn't want to go to school at Springfield, but they said that would be a better education. You need an education. And when I got there, I was crying, and Miss Madge Mingledorf was a 2nd grade teacher, and she sized up the situation pretty quick, and she just loved all of the tears out of me, and I got along fine in the 2nd grade. But my mother didn't help me too much. Bernard, she called him Nard. He was a brilliant student, and she insisted that he get everything, the homework he's supposed to. But I sort of laid low. I didn't want to help him because she'd sometimes fuss at him, and if he didn't, she'd pop his hand, But anyway, I didn't get along too good in grammar school. We had a teacher we called her Old Lady Clark. And she made you toe the line. And she didn't, if you didn't put it down, she'd give you a flunky on it. Well, I kept sort of skinning by. When I got into 6th grade, I had a big old fella, I think his name was Bill Lee. He was bigger than the rest of us. But he nicknamed me Fido because Mr. Hugh Hinley had an old dog named Lucy. And I could walk that dog so good so that her 2 puppies, Tip and Ted, could be on a hot coon trail over about the Ball's place, and I'd walk that bridge and I'd bark like Lucy, and those dogs would come back to me. Well, Bill Lee found out how good I was walking dogs and named me Fido.